This is Dan, and this is the Napkin Academy. Today we're going to introduce something we're going to call vivid maps. Simple idea. We can use maps to represent, replace, or complement prepositions. A terrible word of great significance. Let's see what we mean. Today is a special day. Today in the United States is October 31st, which, as anyone in the U.S. knows, is Halloween. And for those of you outside, you may have heard that on Halloween, what happens is, here's me. We all get dressed up in costumes. And let's say that today I'm going to be a ghost. So maybe I throw a sheet over myself, and I have some eye holes for my sheet. And I run around with my kids, and let's say they're ghosts too, and they've got their sheet. And we've got little bags, and we go from house to house, and at each house we say, trick or treat. And then the person opens the door, and they give us a little bit of candy, which they put in the bag. And we do this a lot. So let me tell you a little bit about Halloween in my neighborhood. Well, this is the block where I live, and this is my house, and there are, of course, other houses around me. Now, what's interesting to note is that on my block, mine is the only house that has kids in it. So if you want to go trick-or-treating to try to get a lot of candy, it's good to go to a neighborhood where there are a lot of kids. And there is a neighborhood just a couple blocks away from my house, this street over here, which is called Elizabeth Street. And at Elizabeth, there are kids who live in all of these houses. So there's a lot of candy to be had if you go down Elizabeth Street. So if you want to go trick-or-treating in my neighborhood, the best thing to do is leave my house, take a right, turn another right down the hill, walk down the hill, past the first street, continue to the next street right on to Elizabeth, and then turn right or left and start going from door to door, and you will start to collect a lot of this candy, and before long your bag will be quite full. So why did I draw this for you? Well, this is the purpose of a map, what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the session today. I could have written out an explanation that said turn right, turn left, go 2 blocks, hit the doors, but what's more interesting is instead of all of those prepositions, to the right, to the left, down the hill, inside the block, around the block, I could just draw the visual equivalent, which is this map, where things become incredibly clear because now I've got the entire spatial sense of exactly where it is that I need to go. This is what I mean by a map. Why would this be important? I got very excited the other day. I was reading a new book. Now, some of you may be familiar with the author J.K. Rowling. And speaking of Halloween, why is she well known? Because she was the woman who is one of the best-selling authors in history because she wrote the entire Harry Potter series about the young wizard, something that many, many people dress up as on Halloween. But as everybody in the world knows now, given that J.K. Rowling is such a famous author, she's recently written a new book called The Casual Vacancy, which has absolutely nothing to do with Harry Potter. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, for the simple reason that in J.K. Rowling, we have one of the great thought leaders of our time, one of the great creators and thought leaders, made up entire worlds which have become incredibly fascinating to millions and millions of people around the world, and we think of her as a writer. Well, the other day I was flying out to New York, and on the plane I happened to pick up the New Yorker magazine, and this was the issue that came out just the time when the Casual Vacancy book was available, one of only 2 interviews that J.K. Rowling gave prior to the publication of the book, the New Yorker and the New York Times. And here's what I want to show you that's fascinating, because as I read the article, the very first quotation that came from J.K. Rowling said, "I have drawn a map of Pagford," Rowling told me when we met in late August. "It's one of the first things that I did." So what Pagford is the little town in which the action of the story, The Casual Vacancy, takes place. And what I thought was absolutely incredible was here we have, in black and white, in words that our literary people love so much, for the first time, the idea that in order to write a story, let's say I'm J.K. Rowling now, in order to write a story about the people in this town, the first thing that I need to do is draw a map of this town. Who knew that J.K. Rowling drew maps? This is incredible. Let's go ahead and look at the second page of the book, The Casual Vacancy, and read along with me for a moment. Barry's headache continued to thump behind his ear as he reversed out of the drive and set off through the pretty little town of Pagford, where they had lived for as long as they'd been married. They drove down Church Row, the steeply sloping street, where the most expensive houses stood in all their Victorian extravagance and solidity, around the corner by the mock Gothic church where he had once seen his twin girls perform, etc. Why was J.K. Rowling's map important? Because look at what writing says. It says Barry, some character, started out in this place, and then he drove to this other place, and along the way he passed by these houses, and he passed by this church, and in one of these churches he had seen his daughters perform. Isn't it interesting that geography, the place where things happen, the location of action, becomes so critically important in order to convey action? And this is what is the importance of a map. Maps are the location and guide for our actions. We are characters in our own lives. We want to do things. We do lots of things. Well, the question is, where do we do them? And what are the guides that help us understand which way to go as we take our actions? The capturing of that aspect of our life and our idea is the purpose of a map. When someone else wanted to write, another very, very famous British author, in this case another J, but this one J.R.R. Tolkien, famous, of course, for The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. When J.R.R. Tolkien sought out to write, he did the same thing as J.K. Rowling. The first thing that he would do is draw a map of the location in which his action was going to take place. And it turns out that J.R.R. Tolkien didn't only draw maps of the action, he drew hundreds and hundreds of pictures of his characters and of the buildings and of the events that took place. It was the drawing that helped to activate his ability to write, not something we're typically told about. Prepositions now. What is the purpose of a preposition? Who cares? Why am I focusing on this? Because prepositions are the words that tell us what is the location of our action. Where does it take place? This is important because as we seek to push forward on making things more visual, and the grammar that we're going to use, we derive it from the grammar of spoken word, which of course, as we remember, began with a subject and a predicate. We've covered the nouns and pronouns and adjectives in previous sessions, but what's interesting about verbal grammar is when we want to talk about where did it take place, the words we use are our prepositions and our conjunctions. This is what brings us back to vivid thinking, visual, verbal. If we're going to push beyond just the words and move into the pictures, and we want to describe the where, in order to make verbal complexity become visually clear, we now want to move on from the portraits we talked about and the charts we talked about and start to say, well, we know who and we know how much. Now let's focus on where. Prepositions. Prepositions, wonderful words. I just started out by looking at the A to Z list of prepositions in English, and look what we have. Aboard, about, above, across, after, against, among, continuing into the B's, before, behind, below. What is the purpose of these words? Well, let's look at them. Aboard says, well, here's a boat, and I am on it. I am aboard the boat. About says, here's an object, and there's all kinds of things around it. Above, that's an easy one. If here's an object, here's where I am. Let's look at some of the most important, some of the prepositions we use the most. And there's something interesting I want to show you about them. They're very, very easy to illustrate with simple little maps. So above, no words required. This thing is above that one. Beside, There it is. Inside. There it is. Next to. The point I want to make is that for all of these words, they're beautifully visually descriptive and exceptionally easy to turn into a picture that actually is in many ways far more specific and far more clear than the actual word itself. Why wouldn't we use more of these maps when we're trying to communicate to someone where are the pieces of the idea? And you know what? Conjunctions are really good for visual representation as well. So conjunctions, of course, are the gluing words, the words that pull together two other ideas. So of course we have and we have for and we have but. So let's think about these for a moment from a visual perspective. Let's say I had two objects. I had this one, or they could even be two ideas. I could say that I have this idea and I have this idea. I have both of them. And let's say that one of the things I want to talk about is I have neither idea. Well, I could cut that apart and say I have an idea over here and I have an idea over here. Here's and, here's but. This is important because as we want to try to move from our verbal fox to help with our visual hummingbird, we remember that they don't look at the world the same. To a fox, a map looks like an A, B, C, D linkage of ideas. But how does the hummingbird describe the forest is completely different. There's nothing linear about it. It's entirely spatial. We want to be able to do both because when it comes to writing an outline, the way our fox would do, it goes in linear order. And some people might look at this and say, oh, I really got it. But most people might look at this and say, business outline, kind of boring, not interested. So our visual mind might draw the map, which many of us would find compelling, but many of us might look at and say, oh my gosh, that's too scary, I wouldn't even know where to start. Well, what would happen if we combined the two? If we were able to use the words as prepositions and come up with the maps visible. Lots of different kinds of maps. We could have simple maps like Venn diagrams that simply show the overlap of different conceptual ideas, in this case, a cup of coffee. Or we could have geographic maps, like our map that J.R.R. Tolkien might have drawn of Middle-earth, with the Shire here and Mordor down here. Schematic maps that show the location and position of various pieces that make up a whole. And of course, mind maps that show the location and relation of different ideas that come from a central core idea. So how do we go about drawing a map? Well, there are 4 basic steps. The first thing, of course, is we have to identify the landscape and the features that we want to talk about. If this is our world, and we live on this world, and we want to draw a map of it, we have to say, well, how much of it do we want to draw? What's the landscape? After we've understood that, we need to create a coordinate system. Because let's face it, one of the things that most maps have under them is a sort of underlying, in the case of maps, north, south, east, west coordinate system that allow us to then map in the features from our world. So here's the mountain, here's the house, here's the road, here's the tree, etc. We map them in, and then we look to see at our map if any spatial relationships emerge that might be important to note to recognize where we should go in our world. That's how we draw a map. I'd like us all to now grab our pens and our paper. We're going to do a 1-minute map exercise. What I'd like you to do is pick one of these subjects, a map of your home, a mind map of your next project, maybe a Venn diagram of your lunch, and I'd like you to take a moment and draw a little map of one of those 3. And I'll tell you what, we'll take a pause, and then I'm going to do my own as you can watch along with me. So go ahead, take your materials, stop for a minute, draw yourself a map. The map that I'm going to draw for you, let's do a mind map of my next project. Now, how do we draw a mind map? Well, we start with a central idea. And let's say my next project is probably going to be a new book. I feel like it's time for me to write a new book. I've done a couple. I finished my last one a year ago. Time for a new book. Well, all my books tend to have what we call a business focus, so I think I'll probably stay with that. But it's not just business because my books have to do, of course, with visual thinking. So I want to stay with that. And I'm thinking that in business, there are some ideas and topics that I am compelled to talk about. And one of them might be sort of business basics, like how do we clarify strategy? A lot of people are asking me about business strategy these days. I have some ideas about public speaking, having now given hundreds of speeches over this last several years. Public speaking. People are always asking me to clarify issues of how do we go about doing effective marketing? And then many times I find myself working with people that are project managers. How do we do that? So I've got a book on visual thinking. So visual thinking, of course, means for me lots of pictures. And since we're actually being more vivid, lots of pictures combined with some words. And of course, making things very clear. And part of clarity, of course, is the idea of simplicity. So that's my book. Well, in order to do the book, it's interesting because actually there's another player involved here. There's my agent. Well, and my agent reminds me, oh, I don't just work with my agent. I also work with my publisher. And my publisher has an idea. They want to make a book series. So what happened is my publisher contacted my agent and said, we'd like to see about Dan making a business book series using Dan's visual thinking approach. So my agent then came to me and said, Dan, this is what I've heard from the publisher. Would you like to do this? Why don't we start to make this book series that covers a range of topics related to business basics using your visual style? So this is a map of my next project. I'm going to make a book and get started with the first one that becomes a part of a series on business books, and maybe let's start with public speaking as the first one, using my visual thinking approach to make things mostly pictorial, to make things very simple. And I'll get this proposal done for this first book, send it to my agent, who will then send it back to the publisher, and hopefully if all goes well, the publisher will say, great idea, Dan. Let's go ahead and do that series of books. Now I want you to see for a moment, this is what we call, of course, a mind map. Because all I've done is I've mapped out what are the components, the features, if you will, the features of my idea, and where are they located conceptually? Well, here's a nice map that shows them all coming together. I'll be curious in our next session if you'd be willing to share the map that you drew so we can see which maps you might have drawn to clarify where are the features in your thinking. This is all so important because maps, as we saw with that mind map I just drew, are what I like to think about as the containers for our ideas. Our ideas tend to be big. They tend to be scattered. They tend to be abstract. They have both some fox and some hummingbird within them. Here's an idea. Well, you know what a map does? A map is the thing that we superimpose upon this idea to become the container of it, to help straighten it out. So the map says, of all of the things that I might be able to talk about, of all of the random pieces, of everything that I showed in that mind map, by superimposing a map across a part of it, several great things happen. It provides me with a structure. Instead of the idea just being all over the place, things start to fall in to their various spatial categories. That's one of the things that my map does. The other one is really nice is it provides me with a boundary. It says this is what's going to be in, and these things that sit outside my boundary, you know what, I'm not going to worry about them for now. The bounding, the constraining of the idea is actually one of the most important parts to help make it clear and simple. And then within that bound constrained map, we start to understand what are the relationships between the different pieces of the idea. Do they sit on top of each other? Are they beside each other? All of that. And then, of course, the guides. Well, as we move from our idea, we're going to start here, move to this one, then move to this one, move to this one. What our map allows us to do is take our crazy, completely hummingbird-based idea and begin to superimpose some structure, some boundaries, some guides upon it so that it moves from something that's really chaotic into something that's simple and clear enough that we can share it easily with someone else. What I think is one of the best ways to think about which map to draw. So of all these different kinds of maps available, which map would we want to draw? Let's start out by making a kind of a map of maps. What I mean by that is, if our feature set are all of kinds of What I mean by that is if our landscape is the landscape of maps, of which we know there are many, many types, how would I draw a map that shows what are the relationships between these different types of maps? Well, remember, the first thing is pick a data set. I've done that. The second thing is to create a coordinate system. So let's go ahead and do one. And in this particular case, let's just compare simple maps to maps which become more elaborate. That's one of our coordinates. And then on our horizontal axis, let's make a distinction between maps that are largely conceptual in nature, like a mind map, and maps that are truly geographic in nature, like a world map. And now that we've got our coordinate system, we can start to map in the features of our landscape. And let's start down here in the lower corner of simple and conceptual. Well, here we have a map that's a Venn diagram, the simplest possible conceptual overlap of the pieces of an idea. Well, if we were to make that a little bit more elaborate, we might start to get into a mind map, where we're less constrained by simplicity and we're more interested in capturing every idea we can and showing what are the relationships between them before we let any of them get away from us. So we start to make something much more elaborate. Now let's push over here into the geographic map side. Can we make a simple geographic map? Well, of course we can. Here's the most basic. Here's our house. Here's the backyard. Here's the path. And out behind it, what I want to focus on is that buried treasure out there. So a very simple geographic map that allows us to know, go this way in order to get to the treasure. Well, can we make an elaborate geographic map? Certainly we can. Here's a beautiful hand-drawn map of London. This isn't particularly useful in just finding perhaps the buried treasure, but if I live here off of Hyde Park and I want to go to London City, I know exactly which streets to take to get there. A beautifully elaborate map. So let's quickly go through examples of all of these as we make our way across the map of maps. As you know, one of the things I've been interested in is trying to clarify issues around healthcare. So let's go ahead and start out with a simple conceptual map, a kind of a Venn diagram. Normally, of course, a Venn diagram has 3 lobes, but we're going to be loose here. We can have 2 lobes, or we can have 4 or 5. And let's go ahead and look. So here's a Venn diagram. What it is it's the intersection of accountable care organizations. If anybody's interested in health care, this is a term we're going to hear a lot. Accountable care organizations. And what are those? Well, let's look. They partly contain an overlap of the provider. These, of course, are doctors, with strategic partners, who are people who are involved in other aspects of healthcare, such as the money or the process. And if we make a Venn diagram that says, here's what providers do, and here's what the strategic partners do, the overlap of them, what's shared, is what are the competencies of accountable care organizations. And some of the things that overlap are wellness services, consumer education, provider payment models, etc. Well, I was able to find one that became slightly more elaborate, but it is another Venn diagram, also associated with accountable care organizations. This is one that shows the benefits of accountable care by showing the intersection of financial issues, clinical issues, patient issues, and issues related to competition. If we put all of those 4 together in their unique details, we find that there is a map that shows the benefits of moving towards accountable care. Interesting, we've become a little bit more elaborate. Well, now if we push it really far into a super elaborate conceptual map, here is actually a kind of a funny map that was created as by people who were opposed to healthcare reform, showing intentionally trying to show things are so complex in the new rules that there's no way they can work at all. So here we have a pretty funny map, which in some ways is accurate. There is a tremendous amount of complexity involved in healthcare reform, and these are the pieces and how they fit together. Where are all of the pieces and what is their overlap? So now we've shifted from simple to elaborate on the conceptual side, with differing messages going from absolute clarity to a fundamental lack, in this case, a lack of clarity, but all maps. Well, now let's shift over into the geographic side. I remember as a kid, one of the first stories that was read to me was Winnie the Pooh. And one of the reasons that I remember it and love it is because I recall so well that if you opened the Winnie the Pooh book, on the inside cover was a map of the 100-acre wood, which is where all of the action took place. The location, the position, and the relationships of all of the action. So one of the main characters, of course, is Christopher Robin, where here's where he lives. Another character, of course, is Piglet. Here's where Piglet lives. Another character, of course, is the rabbit, and here's where the rabbit lives. And isn't it lovely, I thought, to be able to see how they move from one to the other. Oh, and look, here's where Pooh himself lives, and the adventures he has as he moves around the locations of the 100-acre wood. The power of a map. As I got a little bit older, I remember reading the book Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. And what made this book so compelling? Magnificent story. And if you open up the cover, what do you see? A map. A map of what? A map of Treasure Island. When you would read the book, you could flip back and forth between the pages and the map and watch as the action took place as people moved from one part to another, searching for the treasure on Treasure Island. The magic of the prepositions of the words made live through the map that shows us where it happens. And as we move into the more modern age, and we want to move into a truly elaborate map, a lot of people play computer games these days. The absolute saturation of ourselves in a fictional world where we are actually living in a world that doesn't exist at all. But it certainly fools us in our mind into believing that it exists, a world in which we can take action and we can make decisions and we can do things. And what's the most important part of this world? The most important part is to be able to look at the map. And here we have a wildly elaborate map from one computer game where I am able to see literally how I can move my mind into a fictional world and have the guides and the borders and the boundaries around my actions by having an incredibly elaborate map that I can move through, taking action as I go. The power of the map. From Winnie the Pooh to Call of Duty, the guideline and the holder of our action. Last thoughts then on maps. Maps become the guideposts for our ideas. The guideposts in the sense that they give us location. Where does everything take place? It takes place here. And it shows us the relationship between the ideas. Are they far apart or are they next to each other? And then ultimately it shows us the position of our own actions. I'm here. I need to move here. The action of my moving from there to there is a story beautifully told through words which are supported by my map. Now it's your turn. Homework for maps. Here's what I'd like you to do. Practice a couple of maps. First off, as a warm-up, I'd like you to draw 2 basic maps from this list. Either make a map of your office, including at least 3 features. Create a mind map of your family, What might that look like? Well, here's me, here's my sister, here's my wife, here's my brother, here's my father, here's my mother. Or maybe you draw a Venn diagram of 3 favorite movies. Oh, that's interesting. Let's try that one. What's the overlap of 3 of my favorite movies? Those are our warm-up maps. After you've warmed up, I want us to think about our own career for a moment, kind of an extension from our homework of last week when we drew charts. Now I want us to draw maps of our career, 2 of them. A geographic map of our career. Literally show the locations in which you've worked. And then I want you to draw a conceptual map of your career. I had this job. I had this job. They overlapped here. That was interesting. Then I had this other job over here. No overlap at all. Let's take a moment now, have some of our fellow associates share the work that they've done.
Deborah, can you hear me okay? I've turned your speaker on.
I can hear you, Dan.
Wonderful. So, Deborah, I believe you're with us out of Colorado. And
yes.
So what I'd like to do is I've got a series of your drawings here, and I wonder if you could just kind of take us through some of your work. Remind us of what was the homework, and then I'll hold the drawings, and you tell us what they show.
The homework was charts, different charts. This one happens to be the people in my family, and I decided to do demographics by age. There's four of us, and I decided to do a simple pie chart and just color in by demographic in age categories.
Oh, this is lovely. So there's you over here, right, Deb? And then there and you know, I don't want to give away too much, but you've mapped it in. So between the age of 50 to 70,
yep.
You've got Beth, who's over 70. You've got Mike, who is of similar age, and then we've got Jacob down here, who is under 10. That's a wonderful little chart. Can I go on to the next one?
Sure.
Tell us what this is.
That was a chart of free time versus work time. Happened to be just a snapshot of last week. Had quite a bit of free time last week, fortunately. So it was just how many hours in a day, and just a bar chart of how many work hours versus free time I had any particular day.
So Saturday and Sunday, you must work weekends. I see a lot of work on Saturday and Sunday. Is that right?
I work a lot on Saturday and Sunday.
Well, it looks like Saturday you have almost no free time at all. And this is kind of lucky. It looks like you have a fair amount of free time on Friday.
Yeah. I try to sort of work it depending on what I have to do and when I have to get it done, and work it around everybody else's schedule. So weekends I have a tendency to work a lot.
Well, Debbie, this is why I love charts, because knowing nothing about what you do or nothing about your background, it's really intriguing, because as I look at this, the first time I looked at it, I assumed that black must mean free time because most people have their free time on the weekend. But now, by virtue of being able to see it, it's really gotten me intrigued, isn't it? Because it's the other way around. Work on the weekends and increasing amount of free time as the week goes through. Gotten me really curious as to what it is that you do. You don't need to tell me, but I'm really intrigued, and that's really the beauty of a chart. And okay, so take us through your last chart. These were your warm-ups. This is great.
Yeah, the recent weather in Denver. We had high temperature and low temperature, and I just plotted them by the days that you see there from the 21st to the 26th. So it was fairly warm starting at the beginning, and then we had quite a bit of a cold spell there toward the 25th. It was quite cold and snowing, actually, those days.
Oh, so by this point, let's see if I can draw a little snowflake very well. I guess by this point, when you hit 32 degrees, you're going to likely get some snow in there. So do you have snow on the ground now?
No, it's 75 today.
Oh, my gosh. So, okay, so this chart all of a sudden went back up to here now.
Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome to our modern era of weather.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful, Debbie. So I've got 2 more charts. I think they're more work-related. Can you take us through these? These are not hand-drawn, but just give us a quick overview. What are we looking at?
I am a project manager, and I've been working on a project to convert my organization's printed, hand-filled forms into electronic forms. And I needed to present this project that's been in progress for about a year to my new manager. So I put together a 3-slide presentation for her. And the first thing I did was drew this, and actually hand drew this when I presented it. These are the types of forms on the left side. starting with a static handwritten form, going all the way up to something that's very complicated, connected to a database, works with the internet, has a lot of rules and things that go around it. So those are the various types of forms, and across the bottom are the various types of workflow. Being, you print it out and you give it to somebody and they put it in a file cabinet, all the way to, some simple steps like, it sends an email to somebody or, gives them approval or something like that. It's a very complex workflow where maybe you have approvals and rejections and different areas where the form might go depending on what action is taken. So those are the types.
This is great. This is really clear. So from zero workflow to very complex, and from static up to connected content. And if we map them together, we have...
This is where we are now. We are using static forms with no workflow for most of the forms. And we want to be up in the future somewhere near connected with complex workflows.
Brilliant. And what did your boss or your manager say when she saw this?
She loved the presentation. She really liked the hand-drawn version. She actually wrote down information about the Napkin Academy. It wouldn't surprise me if she doesn't start attending.
Fantastic. And I think, Debbie, we've got one more. This one's a little heavier. So can you give us the 30-second overview of what we're looking at?
This is the third slide from this presentation, and it is I think it's 5-dimension chart of what needs to happen in order to get from where we are now to where we need to be. So again, we have the forms, we have the workflows, the different colors are the different groups that we need to do certain kinds of work in each phase. There's a timeline at the top by phases, and then the blocks represent individual types of work that need to be done. And the real enlightening part of this was we identified probably 5 new projects that need to happen in order to get to phase 3.
Wow. So this became a useful work tool then?
Yeah, very useful, yes. My manager was very, very impressed and immediately wanted to begin presenting this to different people inside of our organization and also outside of our organization.
Wow, Debbie, this is great. Hey, one quick tactical question for folks. This is a lovely looking non-hand-drawn chart. Can you just tell us quickly what software you did use to create that?
This was done in PowerPoint.
Was done in PowerPoint. Good old PowerPoint. Okay. Excellent stuff. You said that there was a hand-drawn part of your presentation as well. Maybe I missed that one.
I didn't include it because I didn't take pictures of the hand-drawn one. I had put this together because I was collaborating with someone remotely. So we put it together first in PowerPoint so we could make changes quickly.
Got it.
But when I presented it to my manager, I actually did draw it all out by hand.
Fantastic. Yeah. Debbie, this is excellent work. I want to thank you in particular for sharing with us not only some of the work about your family, but then pushing it into your professional sphere as well. That's what I really love to see. So thank you so much. Your homework, by the way, for next time is if you'd be willing to recreate the hand-drawn part of your presentation. We'd love to see it.
Sure.
If you could. Okay. All right.
Hey, thank you all for another great lesson. This is Dan signing off from the Napkin Academy, but don't go away. Now on our new platform, you can still submit your homework. Debbie, our community manager, is going to join you right now to show you exactly how to do that, and I really encourage you, do your homework. Okay, take it away, Debbie. See you soon.
We hope you enjoyed this Napkin Academy classic video. We've made it easier than ever to share your homework. After you've completed your homework and have a JPEG or PNG file saved on your computer, come back to this course. Once you're back here, scroll to the bottom of the screen, and in the comments box, you can add a comment. I'm just going to call this one My Homework. You can also add images by clicking on the Insert Edit Image button here. In the source box, click on the file. In the Images window, click on Upload, and then click on Add Files. This is going to take you to your computer where you can search for your images. I'm just going to search for mine in Pictures, and I'm going to choose this image here. You can also add multiple images here. Click Upload. After the upload is complete, click Close. Then scroll down and you'll see that the last image is here and it's checked. This is the one we just uploaded. Click Insert. I suggest in the dimensions box you change the maximum to 1200 pixels and leave the constrained proportions box checked. You can also add an image description here if you'd like. Click OK. You'll see that your image has been added to your comment. And now the last step, the most important one, make sure that you click the green comment button here to upload your homework to the Napkin Academy. We hope to see your homework soon.